This is Your Anxiety Toolkit, episode number 169. Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberly Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Hello there, friends, and happy podcast day. Happy Friday. I have a really cool interview to share with you today. Interview I did with Sommer Grandchamp. Sommer is an OCD sufferer and an anxiety sufferer who, just like so many people, went through some not so good therapy and then found the gold standard treatment for OCD, but also found along the way that she needed some additional skills. And with the help of her therapist, she learned a type of therapy and a complement to ERP, which is called Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. Now, I am a huge Dbt fan. We call it Dbt for short. And I use it a lot with my patients and clients, but I don't talk about it a lot. And I wish I have, because it's so good and it's so helpful. And Sommer reached out and said, I'd just love to share what I found to be helpful in addition to ERP. And she came on and she told us so much good stuff, back to back, just awesome tools, talking about different DBT skills that you can use to complement your recovery from anxiety. So I'm going to go straight to the episode because I just want you to hear her brilliant knowledge. Sommer Grandchamp, I'll just do an introduction. She is the founder of the Discrete Journal, and this is a journal that she's created. I just love when people make things from the hard times that they've gone through. I love when people go through a hard time and they use that to help other people. So she's created the Discrete Journal, which is a journal that helps you to be more mindful and to practice some of these amazing DBT skills that she's going to share today. So I'm going to go straight to the episode. Have a wonderful day. I hope that you are practicing staring your fear in the face every single day. As you know, it is a beautiful day to do the hard thing. And so don't give up on yourself. Keep trying. These tools will help you, but keep trying. Keep getting up even if you fall down. You will eventually get there. So have a wonderful day and enjoy the episode. Well, welcome. This is a really exciting episode. I have with me Sommer Grandchamp, and we are going to talk about some really cool stuff that I rarely talk about, and I'm just going to leave it to you. So welcome, Sommer.
Thank you for having me, Kimberly. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to really just get into what you have to say, because I know this is going to be an awesome episode. Tell us a little bit about you and why you're here.
Okay. So I'm a 26-year-old gal from Colorado, is where I'm based, out of Denver. And I grew up here as well. And I am a sufferer of OCD and anxiety. And I kind of have gone through, within the last about 4 years, a couple of different types of therapy and have been able to heal a lot. I actually started showing symptoms of OCD really young, around age 10 or 11. And was misdiagnosed up until I was about 23. So I had been diagnosed with just everything in the book, including someone who told me that my anxiety was lactose intolerance.
Oh my God.
So I've just had kind of an interesting journey. And actually, I think it's probably common for a lot of people. I think it can be hard to diagnose anxiety and OCD, especially in a younger kid. And so I just didn't have the skills to be able to articulate how I was feeling until I was a little bit older. And since I've been properly diagnosed and gotten treatment, my life has really kind of turned around and become a lot happier. And out of that, I had, just kind of created a business to start making awareness around these types of things and different tools that can be helpful. And I went to my very first OCD conference this year, which is where I met you and started listening to your podcast. And so I was really excited to find something that was really tools based and had like tangible things for me to kind of utilize in my everyday. I felt like sometimes that can be lacking. And so, yeah, that's me.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here with us and here sharing now your knowledge. That's awesome. Tell me about what worked. You said, of course, it sounds like you've had a very similar experience to a lot of people who have been misdiagnosed, been given, being misled or been given the incorrect treatment. So you can share a little of that if you would like. But what I would really love to also know is what turned around, what was helpful as well.
Sure. I think the number one thing that helped me was I had gone to a couple of therapists within my school growing up, and I had seen therapists through my primary care physician and didn't have, I didn't jive very well. And I just was, like I said, I had a really hard time articulating how I was feeling, especially with OCD. I think some of the thoughts that you're having can be really scary, or they could be about really taboo topics. And so it was really hard to find a trusted person to be able to share those experiences with. And so I think a big turning point for me was I kind of ventured out on my own and searched for a therapist who specialized in OCD treatment. And I was able to find someone who I absolutely love. And I've been with her. I see her every week still, 4 years later. And so she focused a lot at the beginning with me on just being able to kind of detangle my thoughts. And what was the number one thing that helped me was journaling. So I think because I had gone for so many years undiagnosed and just confused about what was happening in my mental state, I had come up with a lot of coping mechanisms that kind of, I would say, distorted how my thoughts were. And so even still to this day, sometimes when I have a really strong emotion, I have a hard time detangling really where it's coming from, what's the root of it, and is it anger or sadness, or, I kind of have a hard time because I always masked my feelings. So journaling was kind of my first step into that. I would almost draw like a map of my brain on a piece of paper and then fill in the blanks of, okay, I started here, and this morning, this is something that triggered it, and kind of like a map throughout my day so that I could see a linear, almost report of how I was feeling. So I would say my first tool that was really helpful was journaling. And we began making my journaling a little bit more DBT focused. And that really focused on mindfulness. And so this is like my very favorite tool ever. And I tell anyone who has anxiety, and it doesn't have to be diagnosed or like full on OCD or anything, but I made a mindfulness sensory kit. And so I use this all the time. I basically went to the Target dollar section and I picked out something that I could look at, something I could smell, something I could taste, and something I could touch. And so for me, it was like silly putty. And then like I have a major love for gummy worms. So that was something I could taste, like just little fun things. And then like an essential oils. And so when I'm feeling really spiraled out or really kind of stuck in my head, I use this kit to kind of get out of my head and into my senses. And I found so much help there with that. And then just kind of talking about it with other people who have anxiety. I've convinced a lot of people to make their own mindfulness sensory kit, and they said that they've found a lot of success with it as well.
Right. So let me rewind there for a little bit because you're bringing up some really great points. So for those of you who are listening who don't know what DBT is, do you want to share your idea of what DBT is so that they know? Because like that's the one thing that I don't talk a lot about here, but I really believe in, I've been trained in. I think it's a fantastic complement to exposure and response prevention. So do you want to share a little bit about your knowledge there?
Yeah, definitely. So DBT is Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. And one of the main focuses that it uses is mindfulness. So things like a body scan or like a sensory kit, those types of things helping you be more mindful just of where you're at and being more present can be really helpful for people who have anxiety, because typically if you have anxiety, you're either in the past or in the future and not in the present. And so, yeah, I would say for me, the main one within dialectical behavioral therapy that we focused on is mindfulness, but there is a kind of like a whole idea around wise mind within DBT. And so you have a logical mind and you have an emotional mind. And a wise mind is kind of the middle ground there. So it's like being more balanced. And I tend to be a type of person that's on one extreme or the other. And so this was, I think, so helpful for me because it was so hard, actually.
Right.
Like starting off being mindful was really challenging, but it was really rewarding to stick with it.
Right. Yeah, I love this. So I'll share a little bit of my story with DBT. Is I've been trained as an OCD therapist for many, many years. But what was happening is there were some people, myself included, who would get flooded with emotions so much that they were unable to sort of engage with ERP, right? And so then that's when somebody introduced me to learning DBT. And what I found it to be so helpful is it's sort of again, a skill for life, right? You can use it during the election, which is right now as we're recording. You can use your DBT skills when you're boarding an airplane and all these skills because they're so life-based. And I agree with you that the Wise Mind tool is so helpful for people who do tend to either catastrophize or do black and white thinking and so forth. So can you give me an example of how you might practice Wise Mind? In what situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I can give an example just from this week with the election because it's going on. I know that causes stress for a lot of people. And for me, I think one of the main things was I tend to have black and white thinking, just like you're explaining. So if something is really emotional on the TV, I have a really hard time separating myself from that. So seeing, either violence or something really emotional on the news surrounding the election and just a lot of tension, I think I really pull that in and kind of empathize almost to a fault with it because I start taking it on as my own pain or my own experience. And so that was something I found myself doing yesterday. And I have a full-time job. And so I noticed, wow, I really can't focus at all on my job. All of my focus is really emotional right now. I started kind of feeling like I was spiraling a little bit and felt like it was impacting my work. And so what I had to do was kind of step back and do an exercise that I do often when I feel this way, which again is I will draw almost like a Venn diagram on a page, and I will list on the right side, okay, here's my logical brain, and here's all the things that I'm thinking that are really logical. And then here's my emotional brain and all the things that I'm thinking that are very emotional. And then I try to look at both sides at the same time and kind of come up with what would be a balanced response to this? What would be a healthy coping mechanism? And so something as simple as yesterday, I realized, wow, I haven't stepped away from screens. And I'm realizing as I'm looking at my logical mind, everything is related to screens and everything on my emotional side is related to media. So something that probably would be balanced is maybe I should turn off screens for an hour and go out and breathe in some fresh air.
Right. And that's you being in your wise mind, making a wise mind decision, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. I really do. And I think that it's really helpful, particularly for even I'll just share, I just finished before I saw you a session with a client and the focus was so on this one obsession, right? But what about this one thing? And what about this one thing? So then a part of us coming into a wise mind would be, as you said, stepping back and putting together what matters right now to you, right? If you step back, in the grand scheme of thing, what matters. And then bringing in that logical and emotional mind to make that wise mind kind of decision can be really helpful. So thank you. I'm glad that you brought that out because it's one of my favorites. We talked about the sensory kit. Tell us a little bit more about times or moments where you've had to use DBT.
Sure. So I'm one of those people that you described where I went through ERP and it was definitely the number one most helpful thing for my OCD. I still do exposures every day. pairing that with DBT was extremely helpful for me. And I would say around like certain obsessions. And so for me, I have a big one around my health. So I have kind of compulsive behaviors around health of myself and of other people. And it kind of plays into harm OCD a little bit. Sometimes my emotions will be flooding so much as I'm trying to do an exposure around health. And I think to help me stay level-headed enough to be able to do an exposure correctly and productively, I will occasionally just kind of have to step back and say, okay, maybe what I need right now is to be a little bit more mindful if I'm really, really stuck in the future, stuck on a loop, and I feel like I can't get into the exposure that I had planned to do. If I take a step back and get a little bit more mindful, get more into my senses, and try to be a little bit more balanced and strategic, and just like you said, looking at the bigger picture of, okay, what am I trying to do right now? I'm trying to do an exposure. What is the exposure for? It's for this. And that helps me realize that it's not a catastrophe happening and that I'm doing something to help myself and that it's really important. And I think it gives me more motivation to continue through the exposures, because I think something that I've heard from a lot of people is they get like fatigued from doing their exposures and then they kind of stop doing them. And so I think DBT paired with ERP can be really helpful for the sustainability of it, because I think if you have OCD, doing ERP is something that you'll probably want to do lifelong. You know, you can do exposures at any time and wherever you are, and they're so helpful. But to help yourself not get so fatigued by doing them all the time, I think DBT is a good balance counterpoint.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really cool. I'm curious to know if this was your experiences. I don't practice DBT with all my clients, but I really find it helpful for those who white knuckle their way through an exposure, right? Like they're doing the exposure, which is great. Like I applaud anybody who's willing to stare their fear in the face. But there is a degree of unhelpfulness if the whole time you're just like white knuckling it and you're just like holding your breath and you're tightening up. And if that's what you're doing, that's totally fine, right? Like we're all on a learning curve. But I find that that's when the DBT is the most helpful, right? Is like you said, dropping down out of being, I call it heady, like being really heady, thinking, and dropping out of being heady and being in your body with those mindfulness skills can be super, super helpful. And so for people who are listening, if you're finding that you're really gripping the whole way through, these might be some really helpful tools. So we know a lot about mindfulness, but what are the mindfulness skills that you've had to practice specifically besides your sensory kit? Can you give sort of an example?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I do often when I'm having a heady moment, like you're saying, I have that often, and a lot of rumination. What I will do as a mindfulness exercise is, I don't know if people listening have seen the movie Osmosis Jones, but I remember watching it in school. It's about a kid who gets a cold, and it's all about learning about the biology of your body. So there's a little germ in the movie, and he, shrinks down and travels inside in the body, and they give little, names and personalities to each of the parts of the body. And so I imagine myself being in Osmosis Jones, as funny as that is. I kind of picture myself shrinking down really small and kind of like crawling into my body and seeing where things are happening and what feelings are going on. So if I feel really itchy as I'm doing an exposure, I will imagine myself kind of like looking under my skin and thinking like, I wonder if I'm itchy because maybe the blood is rushing to my skin because my body is using that as a protective mechanism, or because it's trying to, like, my heart is beating faster. And so my blood is pumping faster and it makes me itchy. So little mindfulness things like that. And I'll find myself going on for like 30 minutes, just kind of imagining like, okay, and now I kind of feel like my chest is tight. So I'm going to get mindful and kind of climb inside myself and figure out like, why would my chest be tight right now? What is my body doing and why is it doing that? Those types of things, for whatever reason, they really, really pull me out of my head into my body. And then I kind of feel like I can feel more grounded, and I feel like I can continue with the exposure because I understand, hey, a lot of the times my body is doing certain things to protect me. And it's really cool that our bodies do that. So
Right.
that's a trick that I use often.
I love it. I love it. And maybe you can correct me. The reason I love it so much is a lot of the mindfulness work that I find helpful, in addition, is switching from needing to know answers to being curious about all the possible solutions, right? All the possible things, not solutions. And I love that you're practicing this curiosity, right? Of like, I wonder about that. Interesting. It's sort of looking at things as like from a fresh start, instead of like, often I think what we do is, if we have, like, here is an example. I'll tell you funny. I've probably told this story before, but I had a client who used to have obsessions about having lice. Every single session she would come in and talk about maybe having lice or not. And I would have to scratch the whole session. Like, it would nearly kill me because I would automatically have itchiness, right? And so a big part of that was me training my brain to just be curious about the itching, instead of being like, oh my God, itching, scratch it. Like, do you have light? Because your brain just works in mysterious ways. Is just being curious, right? Of going, interesting. Can I tolerate this for a little longer? What does this feel like?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's so funny that you say that, because one of my most recent kind of spikes that I was having an obsession on was around that exact same thing, and finding myself, trying to see like how long I could go without checking or scratching, or just like if something becomes, if it pops up in your head, it can be really hard to just let it pass through. Just kind of like what I had done was I had to write down a list of neutral words, and like interested and curious were actually part of that. And so rather than thinking like, this obsession is bad or it's wrong, or, labeling something good or bad, I had to step back and put more of a neutral word around it. And so that's actually very cool that you just said, I like how you've been really curious about it, because that kind of shows me, hey, that's true. My mind has shifted a little bit. The way I'm thinking about things is from a curiosity or interested perspective versus a panic.
Right. And need to know, like, I need to have clarity, or I need to have certainty. Yeah. And that's mindfulness, right? Like that non-judgmental sort of just objective view. It's neither good nor bad. It's a very cool trick, but it's really hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I 100%, I don't think there's a lot of things that I do every single day other than like eat and drink.
Right.
But mindfulness is something that I like have latched onto. And I think, just like you were saying before, it's just kind of a good life skill, not even just for people who really struggle with anxiety and OCD, but like my boyfriend, who is probably the most mentally stable person I know, will kind of listen. He's really supportive, and he'll listen in on some of the things that I'm doing. And he'll say, actually, I kind of tried that the other day when, I was in a stressful meeting at work, and it was actually really helpful, even though I wasn't totally spiraling out and having like a major moment. Just on a small scale, it was really helpful to him, which is really cool. So.
Yeah. I agree. And I think that's when you reached out to me, I was so excited to have you on, because ERP is a really specific skill, right? But it is a skill for life as well. Everybody really needs to learn how to lean into their fear, right? So that's really wonderful. And that maybe we won't talk so much about this today. You can share. But the other part of DBT that I really loved is that it talks about being mindful in your relationships too, and having communication and things like that, which I find is really, really helpful, particularly for people who, where their OCD kind of sneaks into their relationships as well, right? So I don't know if you've had that experience, but for me, I found that to be incredibly helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big area for me. Something that I was really working on from an ERP standpoint was not asking the question, either are you mad at me or are you okay, to people that I'm really close with. And this is something that I think it's normal to ask people, how are you doing? Or, hey, like, did I upset you? If someone is is showing signs that they did. But for me, it was every day. And I would be laying in bed at night, making a list in my mind of, okay, these are the 10 people I need to text or call tomorrow to make sure they're not mad at me, even though I haven't talked to them in the last 2 days. Right. And so it became obviously a major compulsion, and it wasn't healthy. And so I think that was kind of my first experience practicing bringing mindfulness into relationships. Before, I feel like the mindfulness was really internal for me and really focusing on just me, but becoming more mindful of my relationships and how I interact with other people, and then how I process my interactions with other people, was really interesting to come at from a mindfulness perspective. I learned a lot about my attachment style and how I communicate by being mindful. And then I think being able to understand that about myself and my relationships a little bit more helped me figure out some tools for coping with these obsessions and compulsions that I was doing. So again, it was just it was really intertwined, the DBT and the ERP for me there.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's so true. I saw this really funny Instagram post yesterday about a woman, and she had a swearing jar where you put a coin in for every swear word. And then she had a jar for every time she said sorry, that when she really didn't need to. And the I'm sorry jar was filled over the edge, and which I was like, that is so true of so many of us who are anxious, right? Is to feel like we have to apologize or always be on edge on whether we're going to be abandoned by our loved ones. And so I think that's really, for me, it has been helpful to be in a wise mind, right? Mm-hmm. I have, to show you a story about me. I don't talk about this very often, but I have a very strong imagery kind of mind. I have flashes of images. That's my anxiety. I don't have intrusive thought.
Oh, wow.
I have these intrusive images. So I could be laying in bed like you, and I'd have this intrusive image of my husband doing something like robbing a bank or something like that. And I would be flooded with emotion and anxiety. And so for me, it was okay, now bring it back to wise mind. That's your emotional mind. It's very loud and clear, and bringing it back to there. So I agree with you. I think that these skills can be brought into so many aspects of our lives.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a great example. I have really similar thoughts, and there was a meme that I saw recently that just cracked me up. And I think probably most people can relate to it, but it said something along the lines of, if I said something weird to you, or I thought something weird about you in the 3rd grade, just know I'll be thinking about it for the next 50 years of my life or something. And I was just like, oh man, that is so relatable, unfortunately. And it doesn't make any sense, but I mean, most of the time, anxiety and OCD don't make a lot of sense.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and it's nice to just be able to laugh at ourselves sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yes, I think a good coping mechanism, honestly.
It is. And it's sort of nice to know that we're not alone too, right? That somebody made a meme about it, so I can't be the only person.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I love it. So is there any other main skills that you felt were like anchors for you, life rafts for you in your experience?
Yes, I would say the last one that I always suggest to people, and I really, really utilize a lot. I grew up dancing. And so again, kind of getting out of my head and into my body is something really helpful for me. And I think a lot of people find relief in their anxiety symptoms or stress symptoms by exercising, which is a big one for me. However, something that I realize that's kind of a little bit easier and more sustainable, because sometimes you don't have, 30 or 45 minutes to go exercise, is just stretching. And I just a 10-minute stretch can completely turn my day around. And a lot of times while I'm stretching, I'm kind of trying to be mindful about how my body feels, and not so much even where my thoughts are going, but more so just okay, this stretch feels like this, and kind of trying to focus on that. It's almost like a meditation in a way. And I think just kind of the movement, and I almost think that maybe stretching must give you some endorphins or something, because I have found it really helpful. And I've passed that kind of tip along to a lot of other friends and family members, and they have agreed that it's been really helpful. So,
yeah. And I love that you bring that up. See, what I always sort of think about as we're recording is how people are listening in and what they're interpreting that we're saying. And I'm always trying to think through that lens of like, if Joe Smith is listening, and I think what's interesting and what I would add to what you're saying, or more just a question, is when you talk about stretching, I think what you're also saying is you could stretch while ruminating and then stretching wouldn't be so fun, right?
True. Very true.
So what I would say just for people is, I just want to make sure is like, when you're stretching, what's happening in your mind as you do that stretch? Like, what's the mindfulness piece for you? Just so that people have like more steps on what you do, because it's a really great tool.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And that's so true. You could stretch and still be ruminating. So it's probably not even necessarily just the stretching part of it. But I think for me, moving my body and being mindful about how that feels. Like if I'm doing a stretch, I think about releasing tension a lot of times. So like, oh, I can tell I have a lot of tension kind of built up in maybe my back today. And so I'm going to kind of stretch out my arms, and it feels almost like when I'm releasing a breath, I'm releasing all that tension from my back. So I'm sure probably the stretching is more about being mindful of how my body feels and how I hold tension in my body, and then trying to release that. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah, no. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that that's so key. Is the way I'm interpreting, and I could be completely wrong, I want you to correct me, is it sounds to me like in addition, that stretch is you offering your body some form of kindness and compassion and connection and expansiveness. Like you're just, you know, it's so important. And it's been such a huge piece for me as well, is to practice being in my body has probably been the number one tool for anxiety. Like just to practice being in my body instead of like trying to run away from it and try and make it go away. You know what I mean? So I love that you share that you're actually incorporating the curiosity and the being with your discomfort and being present with it in so many different ways. Your sensory kit, your stretching, using your wise mind skills, doing your exposures. It's really cool that you've kind of embodied mindfulness in all these areas.
Yeah. You just put like a description to my thoughts really well, just the way that I'm viewing as I'm stretching and as I'm doing, you know, each mindfulness exercise that I'm doing. Just like you said, it's just like being in your body and practicing kindness and not avoidance. I think is really big.
Yes. And that's it. I think you hit it. It's not avoidance, which is a huge compulsion, right?
Yes.
You're doing these mindfulness skills, you're doing this stretching, but you could be doing it while trying not to have a thought, or you could be doing it while trying to not have your feelings, but you're actually dropping down and sitting in that. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so grateful that you came on. I really am. I'm a big DBT fan, and I'm really happy that you're kind of bringing the tools and sort of making them very relatable. It really is cool. So tell us about you and where people can hear more about you.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So something that I had done was I took just kind of my skills, and I had looked online for a tool that I could use. And I do, like you said, I try to do this throughout the day. And at the time that I was looking for a tool, I wanted something I could work on during my lunch break at the office. Obviously, I work from home now with COVID, but I couldn't find anything that didn't say on the cover page, like, working on my anxiety really large. And so I just created all of these DBT focused questions in a notebook, and I brought it to my therapy session and was kind of using that to lead my conversations with my therapist. And she encouraged me to self-publish so that she could use these journals for some of her clients. And so I am kind of the person behind the brand that's called Discrete Journal. And again, just discrete, just because I felt like it was helpful to have a tool that you can take anywhere with you. And the journal is 45 pages, and it has 2 to 3 questions per page that are based on DBT skills and help you just become more mindful. They're super easy. And so you can find me at Discrete Journal, DISCREET journal.com. Or we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest under Discrete Journal. And we sell these Discrete Journals now for just $8. So if anyone needs a mindfulness or DBT tool to add to their toolkit. It's an inexpensive and easy one to use.
Yeah, so cool. You should be so proud of yourself. I love when people find something that's missing and create something. Like, it's just so cool. So cool.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
It's really exciting. Thanks.
Yeah. And is this something you still use?
Yes, we actually just launched the journals in May of this year for Mental Health Awareness Month. So May of 2020. And it's now November, and I've gone through 3 journals, and I go back and keep using them. And I have another one in the works with my therapist right now that's focused a little bit more towards just body positivity and becoming more grounded in your body. So that'll be coming out in January. So
good for you. Awesome. Oh, that's so exciting. It's so
Thank
cool.
you.
Congratulations. Again, you found what works for you, and I think it will help a lot of people. So yay.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful I got to talk with you. I've been a big fan since I met you at the conference.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really, like I said to you, it's funny because in the OCD field, we do ERP, right? It's like if everyone can't see my hands, it's like a straight thing, and we do this one thing. But there are these skills that you can accessorize as you go, which I think is particularly the DBT and the mindfulness things are so key. Right? So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.